All right. I think we're live. I think we're supposed to begin right at 8 o'clock.
Okay, I think that was our intro video.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Welcome to our presentation with Diana Melnick, my husband, Rabbi Freundlich, Yechezkel Freundlich, and myself, Rifki Freundlich. We are so excited to be here with you tonight to talk about a topic that is very near and dear to all of our hearts. I can't really begin tonight's presentation without acknowledging that it has been a very difficult 72 hours for the Jewish people the world over. In our home, and I'm sure in every home all across the world, in particular in Israel, of course. And there has been a lot of emotion, a lot of tears. And when we're faced with difficult times, we know that we can draw on our very long history, unfortunately, of being a people, a nation, that while we are suffering and while we are mourning, we are also still very much looking forward and looking to how we can improve, how we can live our lives more meaningfully. And that is really what this whole conference is about. So we are acknowledging that this is a very difficult time, and yet also recognizing that there is a real need to push forward and to make the most out of our lives and to find the greatest amount of meaning in our relationships, and in particular, the husband and wife, the spousal relationship in particular, which we are focusing on tonight. So just by way of introduction, my name is Rifki Freundlich. I am married to Rabbi Freundlich. We live in Montreal, where he is the rabbi of our shul, which I'll let him talk to you about. I became a Yoetzet Halacha a couple of years ago after teaching Kalas for about 20 years and spending a lot of time being the anonymous coach and answerer of questions for women in our communities, both in Atlanta and then here in Montreal. And it has been an amazing experience to become part of the Nishmat family and to really bring to Jewish women and to Jewish families the opportunity to connect with a woman, with all of our Rabbanim and all of our poskim. And it is something that I feel very privileged to have become involved in. On that, with that little bit of introduction, I just want to add that my experience over the last 2 years, but primarily really over the last 20 years, has been that I've had a number of conversations, too many to count, with women of all ages and stages who have very much felt that their intimate life was an area that could use tremendous improvement and was the area in their life where they felt the least capable of knowing how to make those improvements. And so I'm so grateful to be in a position to be a part of this conference that is really shining a light on an area of our lives that needs so much improvement. So it is our hope that we will be able to share tonight some thoughts, some experiences, some feelings that men and women have been experiencing, and together to understand that we are not alone in the challenges that we're experiencing, and to get some insight from our experts here to figure out how we can, again, make the most out of this most meaningful relationship. So okay, so with that, I'd like to introduce, she'll really do the introductions herself, but I know that she won't say the following things, so I'm going to say this about Diana. Diana is not just a registered psychotherapist in the Toronto area, but she is someone whom I've had the privilege of hearing a lot about, and I've been able to watch her in action, primarily virtually, but on a number of different WhatsApp chats, Facebook groups, and other arenas where she is not just a voice of empathy and a voice of professionalism, but is somebody who has so much good sense and so much understanding of the Jewish community, the human condition, and has really found an incredible way of combining her sensitivity, her adherence to halacha and to our traditions, and figuring out ways to really help a tremendous, tremendous number of people. And we're so grateful to have her with us. So I'll let her introduce herself.
Aw, thank you. That was really nice. We didn't plan that, so okay. But thank you for your kind words. Yeah, I'm so grateful to be here, to be educating men and women about this area of life, intimacy, which we don't usually talk about in public. And you know, there's a reason for that. The rabbi will get a little bit more into that. But you know, anytime we start off a lecture on intimacy, I start with an apology and I say, I'm so sorry that we're going to be talking about this publicly. I'm so sorry that we don't have the opportunity to sit down one-on-one and discuss this the way the Torah intended these issues to be discussed. Having said that, as Rifki said, this is an area of life that is so vital that we are healthy in. And unfortunately, there's so much misinformation out there and there's a lack of education. And that's why we're doing what we're doing tonight, because it is vital for our people, for our community, that we educate people properly so they can thrive in their relationships. So who am I? I am Diana Melnick. I live in Toronto. I am the clinical director of Toronto Intimacy Counseling. That's my clinic I run. We are a mental health clinic. We specialize primarily in sexual function issues, male sexual function, female sexual function. We deal a lot with couples, but we also deal with individuals. We also address maternal mental health, fertility challenges. We have quite a number of clients we treat with OCD as related to Taras Mishpacha, OCD as related to religious scrupulosity. We have both male and female clinicians, as well as registered pelvic physical therapists who we work together with. So we really take a multidisciplinary approach to really help people thrive and treat any types of issues that they're struggling with. So before I let the rabbi introduce himself, I just have two disclaimers. My first disclaimer is that this lecture tonight is really for information purposes only. Before doing anything that we say, either medically, from a mental health perspective, therapeutically, from an intimacy perspective, really it's always best to check with your medical provider, your own mental health professional, or anybody else who you feel that you would be getting sound medical advice from. And halachically as well, I'm definitely not a rabbi. Yes, I've been a Kala teacher for many, many years. I know a certain level of halacha, but I'm not a Rav and I'm not a posek. And so anything that I might say that might be contrary to what you've learned, or it might be a shaila for you, please ask your own Rav and get your own hadracha in that area. Okay, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thank you. As Rifki introduced, my name is Yechezkel Freundlich. Rifki and I have been in Montreal now for nearly 4 years. We were nearly 5 years. It feels like 4. It's gone by so fast. We spent about 10 years in Atlanta in the shul in Beth Jacob. But prior to that, a total of 15 years in Atlanta, 10 of which in the shul. And it's really my greatest claim to fame is being married to a Yoetzet. To Rifki. As has been mentioned, one of the reasons why this was really an important session to lead, as Diana said, it's really been Jewish tradition for thousands of years to keep these kind of conversations private. They are sacred, and intimacy is, of course, the most private aspect of a couple's relationship. And that, so for very good reason, it's been generally kept one-on-one in private discussions. But there's a certain reality that we live in. As a Rav, all of my colleagues give classes on Hilchos Shabbos regularly. We give classes on Hilchos Brachos regularly. We talk about the laws of the kitchen. We field questions on this happened in the kitchen, the meat, the milk, it all got mixed up. What do we do? There's a general sense of continuing education that we all go through. No one is expected to know everything when they finish high school or even seminary. We, of course, continue to learn and to grow. And as much as that's a part of our everyday life, and there are even aspects as a Rav where one can even see in a community where there are areas that need improvement or chizuk. If, let's say, just as an example, you find there's talking in shul, the rabbi sees that. He can address it. He can give a shmooze about these kinds of randomly suggested topics. But the relationship between husband and wife, and their most intimate relationship between husband and wife, in this area, at best, what do we have? A chassan and kala get a few classes before they're married. They're deer in headlights. Whatever's going to happen is going to be different than whatever they imagine is going to happen. And then that's it. It's as if we just send them off into life for them to figure it out on their own without any guidance along the way. Even though every other aspect of halacha, of course you need guidance. Every other aspect of a life has many other continuing classes. So this aspect, which is so sensitive and so delicate, and where each part of the couple is so vulnerable in this sensitive aspect of their relationship, and can lead to so much hurt or feeling ignored, neglected, and yet can bring the greatest aspect to their marriage, needs to be addressed. There needs to be some attention paid to it as well. So the goals, as Diana just said, I'll just reiterate, really there are 2 goals for tonight. Number 1 is hopefully our resident expert, Diana, together with our resident Yoetzet, will share a lot of nuggets of information that will be intrinsically valuable. And secondly, just to put it on the table that this is an area of all of our lives that requires attention. And it should be something that one should speak to a professional with, a Rav, a Yoetzet, whoever. It's just like every other aspect of our life needs attention. And we want to bring that to the forefront, that is something that's so valuable to spend time talking about.
Perfect. And I want to thank you both for bringing your all of your wisdom to this conversation tonight. And in particular, I think it's really important that we have a rabbi on board who is acknowledging that this is an area that requires all of our investment, much like every other area of our Jewish lives and our personal lives. So with that, I'm just going to give a little bit of an the context of tonight's presentation. Both my husband and myself are going to read some cases. We hope to get through at least 3 of them that we hope bring to the fore, will help us address some very significant issues that we have all heard about, either Diana or both of us have heard about. And the plan is that we'll read it from either a woman or man or perhaps a couple's perspective. We'll address it, dear Diana, and then Diana will respond. Following Diana's response, either my husband or myself or both of us will share some of our insight and some of the Torah's wisdom that needs to be shared as well, we think, in this conversation. We do have, thanks to Dina Block, a moderator behind the scenes. And so if anyone has questions that they would like to have us address, we will do our best to do that in the limited amount of time that we have. I believe there is a Q&A feature, and Dina Block is going to be managing that for us. So thank you, Dina. Okay, number 1, dear Diana, I am so tired from the demands of my everyday life. Between my children, my house, my job, taking care of my parents, and there's so many other things that I find take up the many hours and all of my energy. And this is all the more true since COVID began. Well, if I'm being honest, it's been a challenge since before COVID as well. There's always something that seems to be dragging me in, something that's always pulling my attention. I want my husband and myself to have a passionate and healthy relationship. And I know that intimacy is a big part of that. And of course, I love my husband. I sometimes feel so guilty that I'm not as interested in intimacy as he is. I'm not as eager, or I'm not as willing to put in the time and the effort that I have a feeling it requires. Is there something wrong with me? Is there something wrong with our marriage? Signed, a tired and guilty wife.
Yeah, I hear this a lot, guys. I don't know about you, but this is yes, it's signed, a tired guilty wife, but the truth is, I hear this from both spouses, that in today's day and age, especially during a pandemic, which is going strong here in Canada. I know those people in the States, you guys are almost done with it, but we're like in lockdown number 805. Life is tough, right? Life is tough to begin with. We're working, we have children, we have housework, right? And now we have a pandemic on top of that. So it makes a lot of sense that people are feeling stretched to the limit, that people are feeling stressed. I find it really interesting that this writer is saying, we don't have time for intimacy. And I think it's really important for us to maybe take a step back and define what are we talking about when it comes to intimacy? Are we using intimacy as a euphemism for sexuality and sexual interests? Are we using intimacy as defining closeness, emotional bonding? So I think that's really important, that when we look at intimacy, for me personally, I like to define intimacy not just physicality, but intimacy is a really beautiful term that we could use for any closeness, emotional closeness, physical closeness, all of it. So that's number 1. I hope that's clear, that when we're using the word intimacy, we're not just talking about sex and we're not just talking about emotional bonding. We're going to use that as the broad umbrella term for closeness in both areas. So next we want to do a little bit of problem solving. This person is reaching out for some answers, right? What do we do? We're so tired. There's so many things that need my attention. How do I make time for this? So as I said, this is really common. Most people put themselves last on the to-do list, right? We are so busy helping everyone else, helping our parents and helping our kids and going to work and helping our boss, right? And we don't really help ourselves. So I think that's number 1, where of course, nobody should be selfish and nobody should be living, only to do self-care 24/7. But I think it's vital to prioritize we, right? It's not just prioritizing yourself, it's prioritizing you and your husband and your relationship. Now, it's important to prioritize both the emotional connection and the physical connection. And of course, as we know, both of those things go, again, lower and lower on the to-do list. The more tired and tired you get, the later at night that it is, and you're both on your phones, and it's like, oh, it's already 11? Oh, it's late. Okay, we should go to sleep, right? So I think that's number 1. And I think prioritization is a word you're going to hear me say a lot tonight, because for busy people, that is it is almost number one. That is the number one goal that you should be creating together, is to prioritize each other, to prioritize your relationship, and to prioritize giving to each other, both emotionally and physically. So once you've done that, once you've decided, okay, that's it, we're going to prioritize this, then we need the willingness to show up, right? We need the willingness to show up. We need the willingness to engage in anything that's going to bring closeness to the relationship, right? I think there's a really big myth out there. This is called the myth of spontaneous sexual desire. And I want to bust that myth right now. So, you know, in Hollywood, which are liars, in case you didn't know, and in the media and in the secular world, you know, we're perpetuated constantly with these messages that intimacy, whether it's physical or emotional, is fireworks and it's explosive and people, you know, are passionate and burning, and then things happen because you're so in the mood and you're so ready. And the truth is, in real life, human beings' brains are not wired that way. Yes, the beginning of a relationship goes through a phase up to 2 years, the researchers have found. The researchers call it the limerence phase of a relationship, where for up to 2 years, you've got the hormones raging, right? Your brain is really attracted to your partner and you can't get enough, and you get the little butterflies in your tummy every time you text, right? But maximum 2 years, guys. After 2 years, we develop into something much deeper and actually something much more beautiful and stronger if we put the effort into it. So after that limerence phase, we kind of shift from this spontaneous sexual desire, spontaneous desire for each other, into what we call responsive desire. And by the way, it used to be the people who researched this, such as Rosemary Basson, they researched this and they came up with this model for female responsive desire. But I see this in my practice, and a lot of my colleagues see this as well. This is not just for females. This is for males as well. So again, it's a little bit of a myth that people are always, you know, ready, spontaneous, passionate fireworks. What we want to focus on is, are you willing to be responsive? And that means, are you willing to take the time to prioritize your relationship? Are you willing to take the time to get a babysitter and go on a date? Are you willing to take the time to tell your boss, hey, I'm really sorry, but I can't take on this extra project tonight because I have things to do. Things to do means going on a date with your husband or wife, right? And that's what we want to look for. We want to look for a place where you carve out time for each other to bond physically, emotionally, and then we want to see if you can then respond with passion and desire. And so for a lot of folks out there, I teach them this little tidbit and I bust up that myth of, well, you have to be in the mood and you have to be spontaneous. And I say, just please carve out the time, see if it works. And it's really awesome, because they realize that, hey, wait a minute. Yes, we do want to be together. Yes, when we prioritize it, when we put that willingness forward, things are going to respond. We will be able to connect. So how does that sound? I want to leave some space and time for the two of you to add in, and we still have lots of case scenarios to get through. So I'll stop here for now.
Perfect. Thank you.
So I'd like to pick up on a thread that you said, but I want to just start actually from a different angle. Part of the question was tired but guilty, where the questioner described her guilt at not being as interested or as motivated as her husband. And I think that really leads to a very important discussion, which is the Torah has a mitzvah of ona. There's a mitzvah on a husband to be available and to satisfy his wife's sexual desires. What's fascinating about this mitzvah is that it is a one-way street. The Torah very clearly puts this mitzvah on the husband to satisfy his wife's needs and desires. The Torah does not in any way place that same obligation on the wife to satisfy her husband's desires. There's much discussion as to why that is, the different biological needs that they have, the different way that a husband or a wife might ask or intimate that they are interested in intimacy. But it is clear that it is a husband's obligation and his obligation to satisfy his wife. Now, this might come as a great shock to many young husbands out there who would love that their wives would be obligated to fulfill their every desire. But it's simply not true. There just is no such obligation. Now, this mitzvah on the husband manifests itself in two ways. One scenario is where a husband's wife does in some way let him know that she's interested. It's the husband's obligation to pick up on those signs, on those bids, and act on them. That's the husband's obligation. But many times, the wife doesn't initiate in any way, doesn't intimate that she's interested, and it's a husband's obligation to be able to satisfy her desires and her needs. And that requires, as there's no need for the one man on this three-person panel to be describing the biological differences between men and women and what women need as opposed to what men need, but this is very well documented that the biological way that Hashem created men is such that the act of intimacy is going to be an intrinsically pleasurable experience. For women, it also can be and should be, but it requires, as Diana, you mentioned, an emotional component and connection as well. And there's a halachic term. It's called pilus, or what we would call in English foreplay. There's a requirement for a husband to engage his wife, stimulate emotionally, connect emotionally until a point in which she's ready for sexual activity. And that is a husband's obligation.
I don't want to contradict the Rav, but I'm going to jump in for a split second because I just want to clarify something, and not that the Rav needs clarification, just because maybe somebody can misunderstand, where it's not that the Rav is saying that a man doesn't also need that deep emotional connection, but physiologically, yes, a man takes much less time typically to get ready. It can take less effort for the man to feel pleasure physically. But that's just one nakuda, if I may, that it's not necessarily accurate to say that the woman needs this emotional bond before she can feel pleasure and the man doesn't, right? Is it okay that I'm saying that?
Yeah, our next Dear Diana is going to address that directly.
Okay, yes,
100%, 100%. The only point that I want to focus on now is a husband's obligation to engage emotionally before physically. And that is an obligation that he has. The Gemara, as it often does, uses a colorful language to describe that and chastises a husband who doesn't do so, uses the parable of a lion who rips prey to eat before the prey has even been killed. It says a husband who would dare engage his wife in physical intimacy before he has engaged her emotionally is analogous to that. It's an absolute requirement on a husband. All of this to say, there's no guilt if as the questioner asked and said, I don't feel as interested as my husband. There's no guilt in that. The avoda, the task, if a husband is intimating that he is interested, that is his task to begin that process. A wife would then, she doesn't have to start at the same point as her husband, for sure not. And in many marriages, it's not, I'm sure, Diana, you could describe in terms of statistics what that might look like, but to respond to him. It could very well be that he is starting from a different place, but as he begins that process, it's a matter of, is she willing to respond to some of his advances, not feeling guilty that she didn't start in the same place. I would start from there. And Diane, if you have anything to add to that, or to Rifki, just as a starting point of this discussion.
Okay, so I'll just add a little bit. I first just want to say that I feel like a big burden, I hope, has been lifted off the shoulders of many women. I, in many one-on-one conversations, have heard these feelings of guilt from women. And I think there is something very validating when the Torah itself is letting both the men and the women know that this is very much a shared responsibility. It's perhaps an obligation on the man from a technical standpoint, but that the Torah is acknowledging the shared responsibility for a healthy, intimate relationship in a couple. And I think, I don't know, maybe there are more men's classes out there than I'm aware of, but I know that women's classes, how to improve your marriage, how to enhance intimacy in your life, how to, lessons and classes on the laws of family purity, the philosophy of family purity, promises of happy, healthy marriages. I personally, again, maybe I'm not on the right mailing list, but I see most of those classes geared for women. And there is something, and for sure, women want to take responsibility for this part of their lives. But there is something I think that is really validating and truly meaningful, hearing that this is something that men and women are both really, we're encouraging them to work on this together. I just want to add one point, sort of, I think something that you both mentioned was along the lines of a willingness to respond. And it reminds me of something that I share with all of my callas. I hope they put it in a back pocket because I'm not sure it's something that they need right away, maybe for some of them. But certainly, as Diana is saying, by the time you get to 2 years, this is definitely something that I've heard from callas years later, is something that they have tried to take out of their back pocket when they need it. And that is the following: that within the realm of halacha and the realm of Jewish law, we are not held accountable for our initial instinctual responses, right? If a person's initial response is to get frustrated or to get angry, to lose their patience, right? That's nature. It's really hard to work on nature. But what we are eventually held responsible for is our secondary response. And that secondary response is the area where there's the greatest room for growth. So in our situation where we're talking about a husband and a wife, if the husband is expressing interest, so the wife doesn't have to feel any guilt that her initial response is, but I just finally got the last child to sleep, or I just finally was able to sit down and think for 5 minutes by myself, right? I've just been waiting to go to sleep. There's no guilt in that. What we encourage, what we hope is that secondary volition, that what I tell the callas, what I want to want. Right? It's okay that right now what you feel is, I don't really want intimacy, but what we would like you to work on, what we hope everyone is working on is, but I want to work on this part of my relationship. I want to respond positively. And what I encourage them to do is to just push themselves a little bit when they feel that they can, when they feel that they have the stamina, the energy. And after a few minutes of engaging with each other, they'll remember how pleasurable this is, how wonderful this is, how much they enjoy this part of their life. And hopefully one thing will lead to another, and they won't have to, the thinking part is over, that there's so much pleasure, there's so much opportunity for growth and connection. And that is something that I try to encourage people to remember, to want, that's something to work on. Okay, so let's move on to the next question.
Hold on. Before we move on, actually, do you mind if I just add a little bit to that?
Yeah,
so if I can just add to what, Rifki, to what you're saying, two things come to mind. Just on that last point that you're saying, well, just push yourself and you're going to remember. It's so fascinating because you could see where we each come from. Like, I'm the therapist in the emergency room dealing with all the problems. And my first thought is, well, who even said that it's enjoyable, right? So I think you're right that if typically their physical encounters are pleasurable and they both feel physically satisfied and they feel emotionally connected, you're right. There's nothing wrong with saying to yourself, but remember, you love this. And in fact, what we know about neuroscience is the more you engage in pleasurable activities, the more you're going to want them next time, right? So we have to be careful, because if actually the couple is not having enjoyable experiences, it's a little bit dangerous to say, but just push yourself, honey, and then you'll get in the mood later, because it might not happen. And so we really have to acknowledge that, to make sure that the intimacy that they're having is good intimacy, and and that they really do anticipate that connection for next time. So that's 100%. One thing.
Yeah. Thank you so much for clarifying that. 100%. And that women can feel safe to be able to say to their partner, this tonight is just not, it's not working for me. 100%. Absolutely. In the context of a healthy marriage. Absolutely.
Well, so this is also where it gets super tricky, because on the one hand, of course, we want both partners to feel they have a sense of autonomy. There should always be consent. They're not forcing themselves to do anything, right? So we want to have that opening to say, tonight is not a good night. I'm really not feeling it. But I've also seen couples who end up going for 10, 15 years. I'm not even joking. 10, 15 years where, not tonight, honey. I'm sorry, the kids. I'm sorry, work. So it's so tricky to find that balance where, yes, you have the ability always to say no, but also to have the awareness that you can't just put your life on hold for the next 10 years. Because what's going to happen in 10, 15 years when your kids all move out of the house, right? You're not going to have a relationship, at least a physical relationship. So we do have to put effort now in the harder times in order to make it pleasurable, in order to make it connective, so that eventually it is something you do enjoy together and it strengthens your bond.
100%. Absolutely. Right. Definitely a balance there. Thank you so much for saying that. I'm just going to address one question that came in because it's very relevant to what we were discussing, which is the question is, we find it very hard to make intimate alone time since it's allowed only after dark when our teens and young adults are up late at night and doors and walls are not so soundproof. Any heterim for daytime sex? I would say this question is compounded, as we would say, al achas kama v'kama, how much more so during COVID, where so many generations of families who have not necessarily all been living on top of each other have been. This is something I've heard about from women literally nonstop since the pandemic began. I don't know if you want to answer that, if you want.
Well, I guess a simple one-word answer, yes. It is absolutely permitted without any question. It's explicit in the Gemara. While it is true, the reason where that questionnaire is coming from is there's a sentiment that sex should be done at night and it should be dark, and that's for sure true. It is also just as true that it is explicit that it is permissible during the day. And certainly in a situation in which, as anyone with teenagers know, the shift as a parent, when all of a sudden it went from putting your children to bed where they put you to bed, is a dramatic shift in many ways. And the bedroom life is one of the most dramatic of those ways in which, welcome to the new world. And if that is an option of daytime, it is certainly permissible. Of course, with the obvious word of warning, teenagers that are up late at night sometimes pop in the middle of the day as well. They're known to be unpredictable. But putting that aside, yes, 100% that is halachically permissible.
Right. Keeping in mind that we try to maintain as much privacy and intimacy as possible, but 100%. Okay, let's move on to the next question.
Well, before we move on, I just want to share that if you're in a country or in a city that is not completely locked down, they actually have an app where you can rent a hotel room just for the day, like a proper nice hotel. And so I've actually, because, for some couples who have a lot of little kids, they can't just leave for the night. But going, when all their kids are in school, sometimes it's easier to take a day off work, or sometimes, we have legal holidays where you're not, the kids are still in school, and telling them about this app has like changed everything, because they can go to the hotel for the day and be back by dinner.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Great
tip. Thank you for that and all of your insight.
I would just add, as what you said before, that spontaneity is often, and Hollywood has done one thing, but for a couple who's dealing with that difficulty of at nighttime because the kids are up, actually scheduling a time to rendezvous at home during the day can create a lot of excitement and passion where that might be lacking under normal circumstances, and just a little side benefit of that as well.
Okay, case number 2.
Okay, case number 2, reaching into our mailbag, representing the men out there. Dear Diana, I was always told, and the message seems to be promoted everywhere, that as a man, a healthy marriage and a healthy sex life will basically cure any other problems in the marriage. However, I'm finding that if during the day I feel like I'm being nagged, or if I'm not appreciated, or if I'm being attacked, or everything that I do seems to be wrong, and then at night my wife tries to make it all better in the bedroom, I'm finding that I'm not so interested in intimacy, even though every message that I've received says that this shouldn't be a problem. Is there something wrong with me? Signed, not always ready to go.
Yeah, great question. I love when we get to dispel the Hollywood lies. So talk about neuroscience for a minute. Let's talk about response. So we know that there are certain hormones that are responsible for sexual response. Those hormones are testosterone and estrogen. So both men and women have both of those hormones coursing through their bodies. Men have more testosterone, women have more estrogen. So therefore, sometimes, right, because men have more testosterone, it could look like men are physically more ready or more responsive sexually, certainly for some men in a much quicker manner than women, okay? Having said that, the other things that are going on in our brain when it comes to sexual response is our nervous system. And in order for us to feel sexually responsive, our nervous system has to be sort of governed by what we call the parasympathetic nervous system, which is everything is cool, everything is chill, I'm good, my body's relaxed, I can eat, I can sleep, my blood is flowing, everything is great. When our system detects a threat, right? So our brain detects any type of threat in the environment, right? This is how Hashem wired us. Back in the day, we had a lot more physical threats out there, bears chasing us or lions in the desert, whatever it might be. Our brain is wired to detect threat and react instantaneously. And we switch over to sympathetic nervous mode, which means fight, flight, freeze, right? We assess the danger, we assess the situation, and then our brain reacts, right? So if there's a bear chasing you, right? Like you're running fast, or maybe your brain is going to say, nope, stop and drop and like curl into a ball. And that's the best way to like escape this danger, right? Nowadays, our threats are a little bit different. So yes, sometimes there are sort of those physical threats. So for example, you might hear a baby crying, right? And that baby crying is like, whoop, turn everything off, right? We're going to attend to the baby. You run to the baby, right? But often the threats that our brain detects are more emotional threats, or as in this example, right? Sort of, my wife is nagging me. My wife doesn't really like me. My wife doesn't value me, right? There could be any number of threats that are not actual physical threats, but more of those emotional threats, anxiety inducing threats. So when our brain is sort of in the mode of detecting a threat, it's almost impossible for it to switch over to, hey, parasympathetic, I'm in love, I'm in the mood, right? Like our brain can secrete both of those hormones at the same time, the love hormones and the, oh my God, fight for your life, run away hormones, right? It just doesn't coexist usually. So therefore, what this gentleman is describing is very normal. There's a huge threat detected, that threat that I'm not really feeling emotionally connected to my partner. He is not a machine. He can't just go into the bedroom and boom, respond, even with his high testosterone levels, right? And so I think this is really important for us to understand that both men and women have to be feeling in their body, feeling in their heart, feeling in their connection, that they are ready to respond sexually. And yes, there are times when maybe, different times of life or different situations where it might be easier to respond, right? So we were just talking about the hotel, right? So it's a little bit easier to like ignore the phone calls if you're in a hotel a couple miles away, rather than if you're in a bedroom down the hall, right? So of course our brain is always assessing, but I think this is really important to understand that really the threat level around you, stress, life, chagim, pandemic, kids, right? All of that is going to really determine whether or not your body is going to physiologically respond sexually. Is that helpful?
Super helpful. Thank you. Go ahead.
So I would just add to this question, the Torah uses two words really to describe intimacy. One is the word davak, to cling to, the davak bi'ishto, and the other one is vayeda. And vayeda Adam es Chava, that Adam knew Chava, his wife, and as kids begin to learn Chumash, however we teach our children that language of, and he knew her. But those are the two words that the Torah chooses to describe this deep, intimate, sensitive act of clinging to each other and knowing each other. And that's really what it is. It is, the Torah wants us to exalt this, as the very famous and oft-quoted Gemara says, when a husband and wife are together, the Shechina is Shruya B'neihem, the divine presence itself comes to dwell between them. It's not an animalistic act just of reproduction. It is a form of bringing a husband and a wife closer together. And that only happens with an emotional bond. And that goes both ways. As much as we can stereotype and the jokes go that only the wife, as you mentioned a few minutes ago, that only the wife needs emotional connection. It's really not true. A husband needs it as well. And if it's not there, if he's not feeling loved or valued in the same way, then it's also the physical connection is not as there in the same way, and a husband desires to be emotionally connected. As much as this isn't said, it needs to be said. That a husband craves the same emotional connection to feel valued and competent and adored by his wife in order to be attracted and active in the bedroom as well.
Okay, amazing. Thank you both. There are a bunch of questions coming in, so I apologize. I keep looking down because I'm checking the chat here. So before I add my 2 cents, Diana, a lot of people want to know what's the name of that app.
I don't even know because we're in lockdown. Nothing is open.
Right. It's not relevant to Canadians, unfortunately.
Right. I forgot.
But, yeah, I guess be on the lookout for it. Hopefully,
Be on the lookout.
Be on the lookout. Okay. Sorry that we can't help you with that specifically. Any recommendations for a situation? Let's say we are addressing. This is sort of. I'm going to address the questions that I got in the chat without reading all the way through it because that'll take a while. But we're addressing here really the scenario in which we're acknowledging that men have a need for emotional connection in the same way that women do. And one of the questions that just came in is really asking about a situation where I guess the flip side of that myth that needs to be debunked, which is that, we said before, men are always ready to go, which is not true. They need emotional connection. So what about the situation where there is a woman who, yes, she craves emotional connection, but she finds herself more desiring intimacy than her husband, where the responses are coming from the other way, right? Like you had addressed this obligation that the Torah puts on, places on the man. And what does a couple do in a situation where the husband's responses are very often that he's not into it? He would prefer that they wait till tomorrow night. There's a lot of good intentions and it's said very nicely, but it just doesn't happen nearly enough for the wife in this scenario. Diana, what would you say to that?
Well, I was just going to say, does the rabbi want to address this from a halachic perspective, or do we want a mental health perspective?
I would say in one line, that is the husband's responsibility. His mitzvah is to respond to his wife. That is in its most basic level. Now, again, in all areas of halacha, so we start with here's the halacha, and then we turn to the mental health professionals to help us address the actual person sitting in front of us. How do we handle this problem? But it should be stated that the starting point is 100% a husband's halachic responsibility to respond to his wife. And then we have to say, obviously this is a public forum, but it would have to be addressed on a one-on-one level. But I'll turn it over to you. Just at least that should be out there as a statement.
Yeah. So first of all, I think that there is a talk in this conference on desire discrepancy. So I encourage everyone to listen to that talk. I don't know when it is. Oh, is it next? Oh, okay. Yeah. So that's number one, because this is obviously, we can talk about this for 3 hours. And what I wanted to say is that I would want to know more, right? Whether it was a man or a woman asking, anytime there's a desire discrepancy issue, I always want to figure out more. So for one person, it could be, but I'm asking for it every single night. And so I can understand why every single night is a lot for some people, or maybe they're asking once a month, right? I have no idea. So it's really hard for me to say to this man, yes, fulfill her needs, but maybe she has a compulsion with sexuality. Maybe she's using pleasure as a way to soothe her anxiety, which if they're both on board with that, okay, but obviously there's an issue here. So I would want to know more before we could really answer that. But let's say it's a healthy medium and she's asking, sort of a healthy amount. I'd be curious to figure out what's preventing this husband from wanting to give to his wife. Is it that it takes too long in his opinion? Is it, we talked earlier about not feeling that emotional connection. So sometimes what happens when one partner wants sex a lot more than the other, it's because there's a lack of connection emotionally, there's a lack of bonding, and there's a lack of giving. And actually the intimacy that they're having is not so great, right? It's subpar. What we talked about earlier, well, maybe it's not even such great intimacy. So they're really left not satisfied and they want more. Their cup is just not full. So there's a lot of questions that I would ask to be able to answer this question properly.
Yes, sometimes the questions are better than an answer that you can give in a forum like
okay.
this. we very much encourage everyone to please, please, please reach out. We all have names, all of the Yoetzet, your rabbis. We all have names of not just competent professionals, but professionals who are also sensitive to the unique needs of the Jewish community. And we really, that is the whole point of this conversation, is to open the conversation, to create a dialogue, to let couples know that these are issues that so many people are facing, and there's no shame in it. There's only, we're only encouraging you to reach out and get the individual help that you need that we can't necessarily provide in this forum. I'm getting so many questions. But
so Rifki, maybe we should do our last case scenario, and then we'll do the questions at the end. What do you think?
That's what I was going to say.
Okay, perfect.
This last one we wanted to make sure to get to. This is something we find is not addressed enough in public, but is often addressed very much in private. So case number 3, dear Diana, we would both say that we have a happy and healthy marriage. We've been married for long enough to know how fortunate we are to have each other and how blessed we are to have the family that we have. But we are also finally ready to admit that our sex life is not as exciting as it used to be, and would go so far as to say that we are bored. This part of our life is not exciting anymore. It lacks passion and it feels routine. This is true even after we've been separated and reunited on mikveh night. Is this just what happens when you get to a certain age and stage of life, or is there help for us? Signed, happy in life, but bored in bed.
So I love that. Is this just what happens at a certain age? So let me tell you about Dr. Peggy Kleinplatz, who's a fantastic, phenomenal researcher who recently published a book where she studied many different couples to determine, which demographic, who's having the most fulfilling and most satisfying intimate and sexual lives. Lo and behold, it was not the 20-year-old college students, and it wasn't the 30-year-olds. It was couples who were in partnered relationships for 30 plus years. Right? So definitely this is not something that should be happening. If anything, as we were talking about earlier, when you put effort into your passionate, intimate life, it should get stronger and it should get better. On that note, let's talk about some practical ways how to cure the boredom. So I have my 4 C's to cure the boredom, which are connection, curiosity, communication, and consent. So let me go through each of those really quickly. So connection, as we've been saying all along for 45 minutes, that connection that the couple is fostering, the emotional bonding, the safety, the willingness, all of that is vital. That is your platform, right? Without, and in this letter, the couple is like, well, we have a happy marriage. We have a good relationship. Fantastic. That's step number 1. You're set. Okay. So that would be our number 1 thing to make sure that there's safety. Next is curiosity. Curiosity means taking a step, taking a breath and trying to listen to your partner and listen to yourself and try to explore without judgment, with an open mind, just to be curious, what's out there. And curiosity is also learning, attending lectures, reading books, just trying to figure out what else is out there. How can we improve? On that note, in the curiosity note, just in case anybody wants to learn more, I love this book. It's called I Am for My Beloved by Dr. Ribner and Tali Rosenbaum. It's a Jewish book. It's such a gift to the Frum community because it's a book that's, it's about sex and intimacy, but it's written in a very tsanua and a very proper manner, but it's detailed enough that it's not like, you don't want to leave it around for your kids to find necessarily, but it's a fantastic book, such a great resource. So you want that curiosity to learn more. Once you've figured out, or once you guys have gone on this quest to figure out what it is that you want to explore together, you need to communicate, right? So communicate with each other. And within that communication, we want a lot of openness, as I said, non-judgmental, but also that ability to really take it in and take some time to think about what it is that you want to try. Dr. Sue Johnson, she's one of the therapists who once trained me to do therapy. One of my favorite things that she said, she's British, is, she was talking about intimacy and sex in movies, and she was saying how unrealistic it is. And she, in her British accent, is like, why isn't anyone talking? Where is the laughter? Where is the person saying, you stepped on my toe and I fell off the bed? And she's so funny how she says it, but it's true. Communication is so vital when it comes to these inyanim and when it comes to your exploration together. And finally, of course, there's consent. And what consent means is listening to your gut, listening to your voice. And it's interesting and it's tricky because on the one hand, 100%, we would never want to push someone to do something that's out of their comfort zone, that they're not comfortable with, that chas v'shalom might be painful or might cause damage, which, by the way, certain things that couples might want to explore, if you're not exploring them in a proper manner, can cause damage or can cause pain. So we have to be mindful of that. So of course, we would never want to push anyone to do anything that's really truly outside of their comfort zone. At the same time, when it comes to consent, there is also this notion that when I know that I'm in a safe, connected relationship where I know that we're going to be communicating, when I know that my partner loves me so much, would never want me to do anything that doesn't feel right, sometimes it's okay to, maybe dip your toe into something that's maybe not my cup of tea, but I'll try it. This is important to my partner. I could try it as long as it's safe, as long as it's bringing us closer together. And so I think that, all of this is something that needs to be discussed and explored together. Having said that, I'm going to leave the halachic portion, of course, to you guys, where I'm sure you're going to teach us about what's usur, which is not much. But I did want to mention that there are a lot of tools that couples may incorporate into their intimate time together. And nowadays, thank God, we are now able to acquire these tools in a very tsanua manner. So it used to be that you would have to go to a store that was an explicit store and you didn't feel comfortable. But nowadays they have websites that are very, what we call friendly. So they're non-explicit websites. I mean, even on Amazon, a lot of things you can find, and you're not going to find, I hope, too explicit pictures on Amazon. But we can acquire certain aids, certain toys, certain lubricants, massage oils. You can get that stuff in a pretty tznius way. It's just about exploring and being curious and thinking outside of the box of what you could do to change things up, what you could do to make things a little bit less boring. Okay,
excellent. Thank you so much, Diana. I will just add that something that came up recently in an Ask Me Anything that we did. It was Zoom, but it was still a rather intimate setting of just women from our community. And one of the things that came up quite a number of times was around, I think one of the things that we didn't mention, we're trying different positions, trying new things. Like that part of experimentation, there is a little bit of another myth that needs to be debunked, which is that the Torah prescribes very, very rigid guidelines about what is permitted and what is prohibited. And that, as Diana alluded to, in this AMA that we did, we took a look at a quote from the Ramah, the foremost Ashkenazi halachic authority, who really is quite open and encouraging of couples, that pretty much everything is okay in the context of consent in a relationship where both partners are willing and interested. And he offers a lot of opportunities for our couples to explore in positions. And as he doesn't explicitly say some of the things Diana mentioned about different toys or oils and things like that, but that is certainly included in what he encourages, which is for couples to explore and to figure out what works for them in the context of their loving and safe relationship. I'm getting a lot of questions here, but if you want to add anything from a halachic perspective.
As you said, almost everything is permitted. And I think, in more specific questions, people, feel free to ask questions, but positions is for sure. Just to be more explicit in terms of what was mentioned, that there is I don't say a myth, but a concept that the man always has to be on top, for example, and which is a myth in terms of different positions as far as what is permitted in Jewish law, what is allowed to take place in the bedroom, and many of those things that are believed to be out there are often not true, and halacha is very, very permissible for a husband and wife to be able to enjoy each other.
And we encourage them to do just that. Okay. I'm going to read out a couple of questions, Diana, and we'll hear what you have to say. After so many years of waiting until I was married to do everything, part of me still feels like there's something wrong with losing myself in pleasure. This person is saying that she got married much later in life, by, I guess, the typical standards, late 30s, early 40s. And she feels like after so many years of feeling that sexual things are wrong or dirty, it's hard for her to get past that.
So this again is something that and Rifki, I'm sure you as a Kala teacher, you see this as well. When, we try to raise our kids with a sense of tzniut, and we don't talk about, sexuality very much. And we raise our kids to, boys and girls are separate for the most part, right? Depending on your community. But even if they're together, they have to be shomer negiah, which is sometimes even harder, right? So it's difficult. It's difficult to flip a switch. All of a sudden, you're going, from 0 to 100 in one night. So it makes a lot of sense. And, our suggestion is always to go slowly, right? And as I said, dip your toe in, go slowly, build comfort at whatever pace it takes. And this is something that whenever I teach a Kala and I get the sense that she's not going to be ready to go very quickly, I always call the Chassan Rebbe right away and we have a discussion. And I say to him, you need to prepare the Chassan. This woman is going to need a little bit more time. And for the most part, they're very open to it. So I say, slow down, build your comfort. But definitely if it's taking 3 years to build the comfort, I would seek out a mentor, a Rebbitzin, a Yoetzet, a Rav, a therapist, whoever it is that you feel comfortable to discuss what might be holding you back.
Perfect. I'm just going to add to what Diana has to share, that pleasure is, we very much believe, one of the reasons why God put us on this earth. He gave us so many physical pleasures, and our job is to engage in them, to appreciate them, to acknowledge them, and of course, to try to elevate all of our physical pleasure and use that as a way of connecting more, in this case, with a spouse, and also, of course, with God himself, who gave us this tremendous opportunity. So that, if we could sort of flip the paradigm, that pleasure is the thing that we're seeking in the context of a relationship, where, as you mentioned, we're trying to achieve closeness to our spouses. That's the name of the game, is pleasure. So that's what we're trying to enhance as much as possible amongst couples here. Okay. The next one is, here we go. Let's try this one. Can you speak to issues where desire for physical intimacy remains, but a husband is unable to have an erection? The wife feels physically frustrated and would rather go without rather than get started and feel frustrated.
Yeah, first of all, I think that, again, with erectile function, people assume it's a physiological issue. And, I work closely with a few urologists in the city, and, I get my phone calls and I get my referrals. They're like, they need you, they don't need me. They need you, they don't need me. The Viagra doesn't work. You think? Parasympathetic nervous system, right? So number one, if the erection is important to the couple, I would explore what's going on. Of course, go to a urologist. That's your first line. A urologist will also run blood work and make sure testosterone levels are okay. But as I said, more often than not, it seems, from my end of things, that erectile issues are sometimes, psychological, and there's a lot of work that can be done to correct it from a therapeutic perspective. And speaking of Viagra and Cialis, there are certain medications that can be very, very helpful. I'm actually a bigger fan, again, not medical advice, but for information purposes, a medication such as Cialis, which is a lower dose taken daily, is much more preferable to someone like me versus a Viagra, where, yes, you might take Viagra and it's supposed to kind of work like on the spot and it puts all this pressure on you. But again, when you're feeling when you're feeling anxious, like even the Viagra won't work, versus the knowledge of, well, Cialis is in my system, so if it happens, it happens. And I don't have all this pressure on this one occasion, right? But having said that, there are folks out there who suffer from certain chronic conditions, such as heart issues, such as diabetes, maybe certain medications can affect erectile function, and sometimes you cannot change the medication. So I would, number one, go back to that, what we keep saying, that connection, the emotional safety, and have a discussion about, is the erection what defines your marriage? Is that the only thing that can bring closeness? So I would almost take a step back and look at the closeness and look at the goals. And the goals are pleasure and connection. And there are so many other ways to bring pleasure to the couple, even if there is no functional erection happening. And I would explore those ways. And those could be explored, from a book or from a therapist. But I would really focus on bringing pleasure and connection in other ways. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful, which is very much available and very much can be sanctioned halachically. And these are all things definitely to follow up and get individual answers to. Okay, this one is sort of somewhat related in the sense, but from a female perspective, that this woman loves her husband very much, but she doesn't feel interested in having sexual intimacy anymore. And she says it's compounded by having some physical pain when having sexual intimacy. We always have sex after I go to the mikveh, she says, because it feels like an obligation to, that's so hard. But that makes me dread going to the mikveh. Where do I even turn for help?
Okay, so pelvic pain is one of our specialties that we treat in our clinic. And I can't believe we went through a whole hour and I didn't talk about pain. What? Yeah. Anybody who's ever heard me speak knows that this is one of the things I'm like, what? No, pain. So BIA, sex penetration is never, ever supposed to be painful. If it's painful, immediately stop what you're doing and go for treatment. And I'm not saying stop being intimate, and I'm not saying stop giving pleasure to each other or connecting. I'm saying stop with the penetration, stop doing things that cause you pain. You might need to speak with your Rav or with your Yoetzet to figure out a halachic way of ensuring that you're still following halacha while not causing pain. But it is so important not to perpetuate the pain cycle, because the way the brain works is, as we said earlier, the better intimacy you're having, the more pleasurable, the more passionate, your brain is going to anticipate that and be excited for next time. What do you think happens when the opposite is going on? The more painful, your brain is going to say, no way, I don't want this, right? And unfortunately, what we can see happen is that not only do you stop wanting to be sexual and intimate in that way, but you might even stop wanting to be touched at all. You might not want hugs. You might not want to hold hands with your partner either, because it just reminds your brain, uh-oh, I know what's coming next. So really, really important to get treatment. The best way of treating pelvic pain is a combination. This is what we found in our clinic, is a combination of pelvic physical therapy and psychotherapy, whether that's sex therapy for the couple or if there's any type of anxiety or underlying issues going on, to get treatment with both of those modalities. And, Baruch Hashem, in our clinic, personally, we've treated so many couples and it's been very successful. So number one, stop what you're doing. Number two, get treatment. And there's treatment available in almost every single city now. So thank God.
100%. Yes. And I think this is something that people are starting to realize. Not only are they not alone in experiencing this, but there's help available, and it's not just theoretical. Very often there's a lot of improvement that can be made. And I'll just expand that question that we just addressed, that I hear from women very often who, for whatever reason, because of what's going on in their life medically or physiologically, they're not permitted, for whatever reason, from a medical perspective, for their own health or safety, to have penetrative sex. They're at a stage of life. You hope it's short, a short stage, but there are women who experience this, and it's somewhat, I don't want to say it's normal or typical, but it's not abnormal or atypical. And so it's so important to recognize that there are other ways for couples to give each other pleasure. And people should really reach out and hopefully try to continue to enhance this part of their lives, even at a time when penetration is not an option for them, or there's an erectile dysfunction or something along those lines. There's a couple of follow-ups, but I want to make sure we at least hit the original questioners. There are young people that marry and soon after divorce. What can help better prepare or prevent? When should one advise a split?
That is so not on our topic. We're not going to talk about that, and we're running out of time. So
I just want to say that I read the question. We appreciate the question. Certainly, I don't want to speak for Diana, but my husband, myself, if anybody wants to reach out and discuss any of these things from a, based on our experience or certainly my husband's experience, please feel free to do so. We want to make sure to give as many people as much support and guidance as we possibly can. Okay, I think I got to all of them. You'll forgive me, please, if I didn't catch all the questions. They came in a little bit quickly, but I think hopefully we addressed all of them. And as Diana said, we're hitting our time. So maybe we'll just do sort of a wrap up, in conclusion. Diana, you want to wrap up a little bit?
Yeah, so just, in conclusion, if I could give anybody some take-home messages, it's, to, relax, even if you're struggling in this area. Baruch Hashem, as you guys see from the conference, from all these speakers, we have such great help available in the forms of therapists, mental health professionals, medical professionals, Yoetzet, Rabbanim. We're so fortunate in 2021 that we have these options available to us, which were not available in the past, unfortunately, but now they are. So we're able to sort of meld all these worlds of psychology and medicine and Torah and Halacha, and we're so fortunate. So let's take advantage of that. There's no need to suffer. Just reach out for help and support in any way that you need it, because what does Hashem want? Ultimately, as the Rav said, Hashem wants us to be in marriages that are connected emotionally, physically, bringing the Shekhinah into our homes. And we really have that opportunity to make that a reality and happen.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I just want to add to what Diana said, which is that I hope that we have debunked some unfortunate myths that have developed. I think they're worldwide, but in particular in the Jewish community. I've certainly seen it with the Kalas that I've studied with and with the women that I've had the opportunity to speak to at different stages of their marriage. And just to reiterate that both men and women very much desire emotional connection, and they both very much desire physical pleasure. They desire to experience it on their own, but one of the goals we know of a marriage is to be in a mode of giving, of creating this connection that takes place, as we learned from so many different sources. This isn't a shir about those things, so I'll leave those out. But just we learned from so many sources that the key to establishing connection and love is to give to the other. And there is no greater opportunity for a couple to achieve that kind of closeness and connection and love than through giving to the other, prioritizing the other one's pleasure, not to minimize one's own pleasure, but to really be focused on the other, to focus on giving, to caring for each other. And that it is not true that there's only one part of the couple that is seeking that, right? We all have our misunderstandings of how that works. And so I hope we have been able to sort of to clarify that men and women really do want a lot of the same things. And we very much, as Diana was saying, we really encourage you to know that you are amongst very good company, that a lot of people have areas of growth in, within the intimate part of their marriage. And we just encourage you to reach out and get the help that you need. We'll just ask you to wrap up.
So I was just going to conclude really with what was said, that everything about marriage is, as Rifki just said, giving. Is about not saying, what am I getting out of this, but what am I giving to this? And when two people come into a marriage and then experience their married lives together, and the overriding sentiment they have every day is, how can I give to my spouse? How can I be more giving, more supportive? And then we take that into the bedroom as well, this most intimate, this most sensitive, this most delicate aspect of our lives. And what's guiding both partners, both spouses, is a sense of, how can I provide pleasure? How can I give? Then whatever issues come out, there is a context to work that out, because both spouses have that overriding agenda of, how can I give? How can I provide? How can I be a source of support and a source of pleasure to give to my spouse? And in that context, we could truly bring the Shekhinah into our homes, bring the divine presence amongst us. And I hope that we were successful in our goal to bring this very delicate topic put it on the table, and based on the questions that have come in, it is clearly an issue that's on the minds and involved in the lives of all of us, really, and hopefully will be a springboard to continue the discussion with one's mentor, with a guide, with a health professional, with a Rav, with a Rebbitzin, with the Yoetzet, and help move all of our marriages, which are great already, and make them even better.
We thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you to Dina for your
Thank you so
behind the scenes work. And we're grateful that you joined us tonight. Please be in touch if we can help you in any way.